In the farthest reaches of the galaxy, where law is a whisper and danger is a roar, there are countless stories lost to the void. In these remote corners, rationality surrenders to the savage heart of the unknown, and survival itself becomes both creed and currency. Among these stories is mine, a bounty hunter chasing the deadliest creature in the cosmos for a price that could buy more than just freedom. This story begins in a sector only the desperate or the foolhardy would enter, in the ghost-lit corridors of star systems abandoned by both governments and criminals alike, where the normal rules of civilization might as well be fairy tales whispered to children. It started in the off-limit zones, places only the reckless dare to venture. My cockpit lights had long been dimmed to save on auxiliary power, and the hum of the ship's reactor reverberated in my bones, a constant reminder of how fragile machinery and flesh could be in this domain. My bounty scanner, keyed to a broad network of illicit bulletins, flickered at irregular intervals across the console, pinging with potential marks. Most of them were petty criminals, pirates, or small-time smugglers. Nothing too enticing, certainly not enough to justify the risk of a dangerous jump or a shootout. Then a single coded listing flared up in bright crimson, nearly burning an afterimage into my retinas. Namakuji, lethal class creature, bounty. 3.5 trillion credits. I had heard the rumors of this thing. The Namakuji, allegedly unstoppable, rumored to have devoured entire armadas, leaving only twisted remnants of hulls drifting through space. The legend cast it as more than just an apex predator. It was practically a cosmic horror that people whispered about under their breath in seedy spaceports. The sum of credits attached to it was enough to buy an entire planet, or build a personal fortress on a secluded moon, or vanish into a private paradise for the rest of your days. Yet, for all that unimaginable wealth, no one had ever gone after the beast and lived to claim the reward. Sitting there, in the dim glow of my ship's console, I felt a mixture of exhilaration and dread. My ship was a battered, older model, a junk heap by some standards, but it had survived more scrapes and scuffles than any brand new fancy cruiser would have. I had a habit of naming my vessels after extinct creatures from old Earth. This one was called Wraith's Wing, a nod to the stealth approach I often relied on for survival. The bounty listing provided only a set of coordinates and a single line of text. Location update, Harrow's Red X planet. Approach with extreme caution. Harrow's. Just the name sent a chill down my spine. Records classified it as a Red X planet for good reason. Lethal storms that could rip smaller craft apart in minutes, tectonic movements so violent they rendered the terrain unpredictable, and atmospheric shifts that ranged from scorching, toxic heat to subarctic blasts in a matter of hours. Some explorers came back with nightmarish tales of colossal fauna, creatures that seemed to emerge from the planet's very core, monstrous and impossibly resilient. Others never returned at all. Suffice to say, Harrow's was not a destination anyone sane would choose, but the bounty was too large to ignore. My life was a cycle of hunts, tracking elusive or deadly targets, delivering them dead or alive, collecting my credits, and then drifting on to the next contract. And with every job, the stakes seemed to rise, pushing the limits of what I was willing to risk. But no matter how steep the hazards, it was rarely personal. It was a game of skill, luck, and the willingness to get blood on your hands. Yet, something about the Namakuji felt different, like staring into the mouth of destiny itself. Some hunts define the hunter, and I had a gut feeling that this one would change me forever. A descent into danger. Finalizing the jump coordinates wasn't difficult. Just input the data from the bounty listing and let the star charts do the rest. The real challenge was summoning the nerve to actually engage the FTL drive and leap into the unknown. As the engine roar built into a crescendo, I braced myself. No turning back now, I thought. The stars stretched, becoming long spears of light in the panoramic canopy of space, and then everything vanished into the swirling limbo of faster-than-light travel. For a moment, my mind drifted. Memories of simpler hunts on frontier worlds, quick in-and-out jobs with decent pay and minimal fuss. Yet, none of those hunts had promised anything close to the bounty that now beckoned me. The transition from FTL to sublight near Harrow's was jarring. My ship lurched violently, as though the planet itself resisted any intruder's arrival. Alarms blared, and the shaking was bad enough to rattle the fillings in my teeth. Atmospheric interference scrambled the instruments, making the altimeter and scanner flicker. The hull temperature rose dangerously as we cut through the cloud layers. Clouds tinted in ominous shades of crimson, gold, and deep violet. Static electricity danced across the exterior plating of the Wraith's Wing, casting branching arcs of light across the cockpit's interior. When we finally punched through the storms, I caught my first glimpse of Harrow's surface. It was a swirl of red, silver, and black, like a planet scarred by cosmic forces with no regard for life. Jagged mountains towered into the sky, their peaks glowing with some kind of bioluminescent lichen or fungal growth. Vast chasms rent the ground, splitting open like wounds that vented steam and strange gases into the atmosphere. The landing computer fought me every inch of the way, beeping furiously with warnings. Unstable terrain, high wind shear, uncertain atmospheric composition. But landing was the only option if I hoped to claim the Namakuji bounty. With a surge of thruster power, I guided the Wraith's wing onto a relatively flat mesa. The moment the landing gear touched the ground, the planet's gravity felt heavier, thicker, as if Harrow's itself attempted to snare me. The wind howled around the hull, sounding eerily like some feral beast circling its prey. That I powered down unnecessary systems and performed a final check on my gear. I'd brought top-of-the-line weaponry, a coil rifle capable of piercing even the sturdiest chitin, an energy blade meant for close-quarters combat, and a variety of explosive charges for emergencies. My armor was forged from a lightweight but durable alloy, complete with an airtight helmet for uncertain atmospheres. More than once, I had survived only by the margin of this armor's advanced life support system. Stepping onto Harrow's, the first thing that struck me was the silence after the ship's engines faded. It was a suffocating stillness, almost conspiratorial, as though a million eyes waited just beyond sight, assessing the intruder. The planet's air had a metallic taste, and the gravity pressed on my shoulders like an invisible hand pushing me down. Rocks crumbled underfoot, and small, scuttling creatures darted away with uncanny speed, blending into the harsh terrain. My radar pinged softly, indicating movement half a kilometer to the east. The scanner flickered as it fought the interference from the planet's intense electromagnetic fields. I adjusted the settings, focusing on the largest biosignatures. Most were moderate in size, possibly animals or apex predators that roamed Harrow's. Yet, in the corner of the display, an icon flashed intermittently, revealing something massive. Each time it reappeared, the scanner struggled to define its readings, as if the subject was cloaked or simply too large to categorize. That had to be the Namakuji. Shadows of uncertainty. I began my trek across the alien landscape, each step a reminder of how precarious my position was. The ground was uneven, pitted with cracks that emanated an occasional hiss of steam. The rock formations here weren't just inert stone. Some seemed to pulse with faint luminescence, and others crumbled at a mere touch. A single misstep could send me plunging into some subterranean nightmare. Clouds churned overhead with a violent energy, casting twisted shadows that shifted as quickly as the wind. At times, thunder rumbled across the vast emptiness, but no lightning accompanied it. My instincts were on high alert. When you've hunted for as many cycles as I had, you learn to heed the environment's cues. Every sense in my body screamed that I was being watched. That I stopped behind a jagged outcropping and scanned the horizon. Nothing but swirling dust devils in the distance, an alien silence creeping back in. Then, out of nowhere, a guttural roar cut through the air like a scythe. My pulse surged. The sound was so raw and primal that it seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. For a moment, the wind died, as if paying deference to the monstrous call. A second roar answered from afar, more distorted, echoing across the canyons. Adrenaline spiked in my veins, and I slipped into a combat stance, coil rifle at the ready. But the roars faded, leaving an uneasy stillness behind. I continued forward, heart thumping, muscles coiled like springs. My mind buzzed with the knowledge that these were not ordinary creatures. If lesser fauna here roared with such vigor, what kind of terror would the Namakuji unleash? As I proceeded, the landscape began to change subtly. The rocky ground gave way to spongy, moss-like growth. It looked slick and glistening, an emerald hue reflecting faintly from unknown light sources. Each step made a soft squish, and I could feel my boots sinking ever so slightly. Some of these patches pulsed with an internal glow, a rhythmic pattern like a heartbeat. Yet, none of my readings indicated they were alive in the traditional sense. There was something unnatural about Harrow's, some synergy between geology and biology that I had never seen before. A sudden quake rumbled beneath my feet, sending me sprawling to the ground. Rocks tumbled from nearby cliffs, and fissures cracked open around me. I scrambled to find stable footing as a gaping chasm tore through the mossy field, revealing subterranean caverns far below. The quake subsided as quickly as it began, leaving dust swirling in the air, the faint tang of sulfur seeping from newly exposed depths. Regaining my composure, I glanced down into the freshly formed ravine. Greenish luminescent fungi clung to the walls, illuminating an underground river that glowed with eerie phosphorescence. My suit's sensors registered pockets of toxic gas, not lethal if I stayed above ground, but enough to remind me that every layer of Harrows was lethal in its own right. Encounter with the planet's guardians continuing my search for the Namakuji. I cut across a maze of towering rock spires and twisted formations that reminded me of ancient coral reefs, but bleached and lifeless. Then the radar chimed again. A large life form was just ahead, perhaps 100 meters around the bend. My breath caught. My finger tensed around the trigger of my coil rifle, expecting the cosmic horror of the Namakuji itself. Instead, I found a beast reminiscent of a reptilian predator, about the size of my ship's cockpit, with rugged scales and 4 massive, clawed limbs. It crouched by a pool of steaming, murky liquid, drinking in cautious gulps. Even from this distance, I could see its powerful musculature under the thick hide, each movement graceful yet deadly. As if sensing my presence, it lifted its head and locked eyes with me. The moment stretched, electric and tense, until it roared. A guttural, alien cry that reverberated deep in my chest. I had no time to wonder if it might ignore me. The creature charged, covering the distance in a blur of primal fury. I raised my rifle, bracing it against my shoulder, and squeezed the trigger. The coil rifle spat energy bolts with lethal precision, each shot thundering in my ears. The beast staggered under the barrage, but refused to fall. It thundered forward, snapping powerful jaws that could shear through metal. My thoughts narrowed to a single objective. Survive. I fired again, this time aiming for its flank. One shot connected with a vulnerable gap in its armored scales, and the creature howled in pain. Despite its injury, it lunged, jaws wide. I sidestepped, feeling the rush of air from its snapping maw just inches away. One misstep would have spelled my end. With trembling resolve, I lined up my final shot. The beam tore into the spot behind its neck crest. A direct hit. The creature roared in defiance, stumbled, and collapsed, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. For several moments, I just stood there, panting. My vision swam from the intensity of battle, and every muscle quivered with residual adrenaline. A wave of relief washed over me as I realized I was still in one piece. Approaching the fallen beast, I felt a twinge of respect. It was a creature bred by this savage world, surviving unimaginable odds until our paths crossed. Gently, I placed a hand against its cooling hide. This was the price of living in a universe of predators. Only one of us could walk away. Yet that victory was hollow. I had come for the Namakuji, a monster reputedly as large as a starship, far more cunning and ancient. If I had barely handled this lesser creature, what chance would I have against something infinitely more formidable? Nightfall and reflection dusk settled swiftly, as though the planet itself couldn't bear to keep the sun in the sky for too long. The temperature plummeted, transforming the dusty plains and rocky crags into a frigid wilderness. Each exhalation crystallized in the air, and my breath rasped inside the helmet. I sought shelter in the lee of a massive boulder, setting up a small energy field that provided a semblance of warmth. My portable heater hummed quietly. Pushing back the biting cold, I built a modest campfire, more for the psychological comfort of dancing flames than any real need for heat. As the flickering glow illuminated the surrounding darkness, my mind drifted over the day's events. The bounty, the roars in the distance, the small, scuttling shapes I'd spotted out of the corner of my eyes, the kill I'd just made. Usually, after a triumphant hunt, I'd feel a surge of satisfaction, maybe even euphoria. But this place drained it from me. Harrows was a realm where you realized just how small and mortal you were, how easily your spark could be extinguished. That I couldn't shake a growing sense of emptiness. I stared into the embers, thinking about the bounty's worth. Why was I here? The credits? The promise of a new life away from the bloodshed? Glory or infamy among the galaxy's guilds? Or was it something deeper? Some test I needed to face? The fire snapped, sending a plume of sparks upward. In that fleeting burst of light, I thought I saw shapes moving at the edge of my peripheral vision, dark silhouettes peering from behind rocks, crawling across the surface of boulders with unsettling fluidity. When I turned to look directly, they vanished. A trick of the light, I told myself, or perhaps the planet's creatures were indeed curious. Drawn by the lure of flame, sleep came in restless snatches, each moment interrupted by the shrieks of distant beasts or the shift of winds. An hour before dawn, I woke with a start. My scanner beeped rapidly, indicating a large entity passing several kilometers away, possibly the Namakuji. My heart pounded so loudly that I could hear it reverberating inside my helmet. But then the contact blinked off the display as quickly as it had appeared, lost to the planet's interference. The white abyss. When daylight finally returned, it brought an unexpected transformation. The air temperature plummeted even further. Clouds massed across the horizon, unleashing a flurry of icy particles. Snow of a kind began falling. Each flake was crystalline but carried an odd reflective sheen, catching the meager light and casting an unearthly shimmer across the land. In less than an hour, the red-brown plains turned into a white, glittering desert. My thermal readings dropped precipitously, forcing me to boost my suit's internal heating. I trudged through the gathering drifts, footfalls crunching in this strange snow, each step more laborious than the last. The shifting winds sometimes blew shards of ice across my visor, momentarily obscuring my vision in a swirling prism of refracted light. Yet, I pressed on, guided by the flickering signals of my tracker. At last, the beeps grew more urgent. The Namakuji was close, a few hundred meters, maybe less. I found myself on the cusp of a vast canyon carved out of glacial ice and rock. The walls were sheer, slick with frozen waterfalls that looked more like columns of polished crystal. My scanner pinpointed the creature deep within the canyon's recesses. Without hesitation, I began my descent, carefully placing pitons and grappling lines to secure my climb. The journey down was perilous. At one point, a gust of wind dislodged a chunk of ice overhead, sending jagged shards raining down. I clung to the rope, helmet tucked tight against my chest to avoid being sliced to ribbons. By the time I reached the canyon floor, I was shivering despite my suit's heating elements. The temperature here was even lower, possibly below anything sustainable by standard life support. My exhalations formed clouds so thick, they seemed to linger like ghosts before dissipating. A fissure in the glacier opened into a cavernous space, lit by refracted sunlight filtering through the ice above. My scanner's readouts went haywire, flickering between maximum and minimum values. Something was definitely inside, generating enough electromagnetic disturbance to scramble my technology. Gritting my teeth, I raised my coil rifle and stepped into the arching ice tunnel. First glimpse of the myth, the soft drip of melting icicles echoed like distant chimes. I advanced carefully, the crunch of snow underfoot loud as thunder in the stillness. The corridor widened, revealing an enormous subterranean chamber, its walls lined with crystals the size of small buildings. Their surfaces shimmered with a rainbow of colors, glinting like a hidden wonderland. And at the chamber's heart, I saw it. A gargantuan silhouette with a scaled hide so black it seemed to drink in the ambient light. Two glowing eyes pierced the half-darkness, each the size of a pilot's hatch. The Namakuji let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated in my chest. Time seemed to stop. I felt both terror and awe. This creature was ancient, scarred from battles I couldn't fathom, each ridge and plate on its body telling a story of survival in a universe that showed no mercy. The air felt charged, crackling with static as though the beast itself channeled the planet's volatile energy. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, predator and prey, though it was suddenly unclear which was which. Then the Namakuji moved, coiling its body, shifting with an unexpected grace for something so massive. The ground trembled, cracked spiderwebbing beneath its colossal weight. My heart hammered, urging me to act, to flee or fight. A fierce sense of purpose surged through me, a reminder that I had come here for this very encounter. We clashed in an explosion of noise and fury. The Namakuji lunged, jaws snapping with a sound like thunder. I rolled aside, firing my coil rifle at its head. The bolts splashed against its hide, sending sparks cascading, but leaving only superficial scorch marks. Its roar boomed through the icy cavern, dislodging chunks of ice from the ceiling that fell in deadly showers. I scrambled for cover, darting behind a crystalline formation. The Namakuji roared again, unleashing a torrent of shimmering breath, some form of corrosive vapor that melted the ice in seconds, turning it into hissing pools of toxic slush. My suit's hazard alarms screeched. In desperation, I launched an explosive charge at the creature's flank. The detonation rocked the chamber, sending shockwaves reverberating off the walls. The Namakuji bellowed, momentarily stunned. That was the opening I needed. Dodging the falling debris, I rushed forward, switching to a specialized cannon that fired penetrating rods designed for large-scale targets. A direct hit slammed into the beast's side, punching through the first few layers of armor-like scales. With an enraged howl, it swung its massive tail. I barely managed to brace myself with my suit's thrusters, but the impact still threw me across the cavern, slamming me into a wall of ice. Pain lanced through my ribs as I struggled to stand. The Namakuji advanced, each step shaking the ground. I realized with chilling clarity that I was outmatched. Even my best weaponry only managed to wound it superficially. Another blow like that tail swipe and I'd be crushed. Yet, in that moment I remembered something. Every creature has a vulnerability. The lesser beast I fought earlier had a gap beneath its armored scales. If I could exploit something similar, maybe I stood a chance. Clinging to that hope, I scanned the beast with my suit's sensors, which flickered wildly from the electromagnetic interference. Finally, a faint reading emerged. A slight thinning in the Namakuji's armored plating near the base of its skull. Summoning the last reserves of my courage, I waited for it to lunge again. When it did, I darted forward, weaving under the monstrous jaws, trying to reach that vulnerable spot that my coil rifle spat beams at near point-blank range, each shot slamming home beneath its plates. The Namakuji shrieked, the cavernous space amplifying the sound into a cacophony of agony. I could feel the beast's hot, rancid breath washing over me, sensed the trembling of its massive limbs. Then, with a final shot, something gave. The Namakuji's roar turned into a ragged gasp. It staggered, twisting its colossal form in pain. For a heartbeat, I stood there, disbelieving. I had struck a mortal blow. Slowly, impossibly, the giant creature collapsed onto the icy floor, its breath coming in haggard rasps. At my feet lay the galaxy's most notorious bounty, battered and broken. My entire body trembled from the adrenaline crash, and my vision blurred with exhaustion. A swirl of conflicting emotions gripped me. Triumph, relief, pity, awe. After all the legends, after all the stories of how unstoppable it was, here it lay mortal, alive but grievously wounded. The weight of a life eye removed my helmet, letting the frigid air slap my face. The Namakuji's luminous eyes flickered, reflecting a mixture of pain and something else. An alien consciousness, as if it recognized me, not just as a random hunter, but as a being with intentions. Up close, I could see the scars it bore, ancient wounds from unknown battles. How many civilizations had tried to kill or contain this creature, failing time after time? The bounty would be mine if I finished the job. And with it, more credits than I could spend in multiple lifetimes, more influence than any single person should have. My thoughts drifted to the endless possibilities. A private sanctuary on a lush, unspoiled planet, a life free from the constant cycle of violence, or maybe a quest to carve my own corner of the galaxy where I could shape the rules. But as I stared into the Namakuji's fading eyes, I couldn't shake the profound sense that this was more than a prize. It was a life, a primal, cosmic entity that had simply existed across eons, surviving by the only means it knew. I knelt beside the creature, feeling the rumble of its labored breathing resonating through the ice. My helmet's internal display flashed warnings about the sub-zero temperatures, the low oxygen content, and the presence of harmful trace gases. But in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. I placed a trembling hand on the Namakuji's hide. Beneath the monstrous exterior, I sensed a living presence, battered by a universe that allowed no quarter for weakness. Ending it would be simple. A final shot, one more blast to ensure the kill. My life as a bounty hunter had conditioned me to act without hesitation. Yet, a foreign emotion gripped me, something close to empathy or guilt. I stared at the swirling patterns on its scales, the labyrinth of old scars, evidence that it, too, had to fight every day to survive that a war raged within me. The practical side, the survivor, insisted that taking the bounty was the logical conclusion. I had risked everything, nearly died to get here. The empathic side, newly awakened and deeply unsettling, asked, was this the path I truly wanted? Would those trillions of credits carry the weight of the blood on my hands, or would they forever stain my conscience with the memory of a dying creature's gaze? Tavern of uncertain tomorrows, in the end, I made a choice. I couldn't bring myself to fire that last shot. Instead, I knelt, gently guiding the muzzle of my rifle away from the creature. Even if it survived, severely wounded, it would no longer be the unstoppable force it once was. Perhaps it would recover in time, deeper in the icy caverns. Or perhaps it would succumb to its injuries here, alone, far from prying eyes. But I would not be the one to extinguish that final spark of life. I left the creature behind. By the time I climbed out of the glacier canyon, the skies above Harrows had cleared, revealing a stark blue hue I had not seen before. Whether it was a brief reprieve or a trick of the planet's shifting atmosphere, I couldn't be sure. My mind was as tumultuous as the weather had been, caught in the throes of confusion and self-reflection. Eventually, I made it back to the Wraith's wing and powered up the engines. The hull had suffered considerable damage from ice and storms, but the old ship was sturdy. Dusting off the snow and reconfiguring the thrusters, I lifted off, leaving Harrows's treacherous surface behind. But the real weight wasn't the battered hull or the half-spent fuel cells. It was in my chest, a heaviness that wouldn't go away. I don't recall the full blur of lights and star fields that accompanied my departure. All I remember is that I didn't log a successful claim, nor did I log a failure. I just disappeared into the black, drifting from one sector to another, uncertain what to do next. Some days later, I found myself back in the kind of tavern frequented by hunters, mercenaries, and traders, an outpost on a fringe moon, floating in the orbit of a gas giant that sparkled with swirling turquoise storms. The bar was dimly lit, the smell of cheap ale and cosmic dust filling the air. Snatches of conversations about rumored treasures, dangerous hunts, and missed opportunities buzzed around me. At one table, a group of off-duty patrol officers drank and laughed, ignoring the tension in the air. At another, a sullen group of pirates whispered in hushed tones over a battered star map. I drank alone, replaying the events on Harrows in my mind. Occasionally, I'd glance at the battered helmet on the stool beside me, the surface still marred with deep scratches from my confrontation with the Namakuji. A bartender, an aging man with synthetic eyes that glowed faintly, approached me. "Tough day?" he asked, voice tinged with a gravelly warmth that suggested he'd seen his fair share of trouble. I said nothing, just downed a swig of my drink, a bitter concoction that tasted of regret. He eyed my gear, noticing the state of disrepair. That's when he recognized me, or at least recognized my profession. "Bounty hunter, right? Heard rumors about someone going after the big one on Harrows." He trailed off, searching my expression. I met his gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about." I lied through my teeth, but my eyes flicked to the scorched edges of my armor, betraying me. He sighed, leaning closer. "I've been around long enough to know the look of a man who's faced down a nightmare and lived to tell it. Let me give you some advice. If you walked away, you'd best keep walking. The guild, the black market buyers, they want proof the beast is dead, or they'll hunt you for it. There's too much at stake." The question he didn't ask still hung thick in the air. Did I kill it? I didn't respond, and he didn't press. Instead, he glanced at the clock on the wall. "They'll come looking, you know," he murmured, lowering his voice. "They don't like loose ends. If there's even a rumor you found the Namakuji alive, they'll try to force the details out of you." I swallowed hard. "Let them try," I managed to say, though my voice sounded hollow. Part of me wanted them to show up. Maybe I was spoiling for a fight. Maybe I just wanted closure, one way or another. "Suit yourself," the bartender replied, shrugging. He poured another glass and moved on to the next customer. I lingered at that bar for a while, listening to the hum of spacefarers come and go, each with stories of far-off dangers. My mind drifted to the Namakuji. Had it survived? Was it still breathing in that cavern of ice? Or had it succumbed to its wounds? And if it lived, would it hold a grudge, or some alien sense of understanding for why we had clashed? Exodus into the stars eventually. I paid my tab and walked out into the night air of that lonely moon. The sky overhead shimmered with the chaotic patterns of distant stars, each one representing a possible hideout, a chance to be anonymous, or a chance to carve out a new path. My ship waited in the docking bay, battered but loyal. I stepped into the cockpit, feeling the comforting hum of life support systems powering up. A calm voice in my head told me I could still collect. All I had to do was go back to the guild with some fabricated proof, or hunt down the Namakuji if it still lived. But another, louder voice, the one that had let the beast live, told me I had already chosen a different road. Perhaps there were new mysteries to chase, new moral lines to cross or defend. The galaxy was big enough for redemption, or at least the pursuit of it. With a deep breath, I eased the thrusters forward. The docking clamps released, and the moon's surface fell away behind me. Once clear of the planet's gravity well, I engaged the FTL drive. Stars elongated into streaks of light, merging into the brilliant chaos of faster-than-light travel. The cosmic horizon beckoned, an ocean of infinite possibilities, where I could slip between star systems like a ghost, always on the move, always looking over my shoulder. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a growing realization that the old me, the bounty hunter who lived for the next contract, was gone. In its place stood someone who had witnessed something ancient and indomitable, who had chosen compassion over wealth in a moment that could never be undone. There was no going back to the simplicity of hunt, claim, repeat. The galaxy might see me as a coward for not finishing the job, or a fool for turning down the money, but those judgments didn't matter anymore. I was chasing something else now. The sense of a life lived on my own terms. Whispers of consequences. Weeks passed in a blur of FTL jumps, short stops at remote stations, and anxious nights spent scanning for tailing ships. Word travels fast in certain circles, and I knew that eventually someone would pick up on my trail. Bounty hunters talk, pirates gossip, and the guilds have ears in every shadowy corner of space. They might not know the details, but they'd suspect that if I were alive after Gunaheros, I must have some valuable information about the Namakuji, where it laired, what its vulnerabilities were, or even whether it was truly dead that I prepared for the onslaught. Updating my ship's defense systems, forging new transponder IDs, and practicing flight maneuvers. But I also found myself haunted by the memory of the dying creature's gaze. More than once, I woke in a cold sweat, the roar of the Namakuji echoing in my mind. One night, docked at a station orbiting a gas giant, I stepped out of my bunk to check on an unsettling dream. My scanners had picked up a faint anomaly, a vessel loitering at the edge of the system, too far to be a coincidence. The sensors caught a partial signature, Hunter's Mark, a small but notorious craft belonging to a rival bounty hunter named Kason Black. I had crossed paths with him before. He was ruthless, ambitious, and skilled. If he was after me, it wasn't just out of professional courtesy. He likely knew or suspected that I had encountered the Namakuji. Time was running out. If I stayed, I'd have to face him and whoever else he brought along. If I fled, it would confirm to them that I knew something worth chasing. Then again, no matter how far or how fast I ran, they would keep on coming, until they got what they wanted. That night, as the station's artificial lights dimmed for the sleep cycle, I made a decision. I wouldn't run. I would stand my ground. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was foolhardiness, or maybe it was the first step in defining a new code for myself. I stepped out of the Wraith's wing onto the station's cold metal deck. My armor felt like a second skin, weapons primed. They would come for me, and I was ready to respond. Confrontation at the edge of nowhere. It took another day before Kason Black's crew made their move, cornering me in a deserted docking tunnel that reeked of stale air and fuel vapors. Their approach was blunt, for armed men flanking him, each brandishing a weapon set to kill. Kason himself wore a smug grin beneath his reflective visor, a worn greatcoat trailing behind him like a general's cape. "Heard you had an interesting trip to Harrows," he began, his voice carrying a practiced air of menace. "Word is you found the Namakuji. Funny thing, though, you don't seem to have claimed the bounty." I held his gaze, my own helmet visor down. "Not everything you hear is true," I said curtly. A moment of silence as Kason scanned my posture. A lesser man might have blustered or tried to negotiate. He simply cocked his head. "Oh, I believe it's true. Folks say you came back, changed. And that's interesting enough to make me wonder if you're holding out on a secret or two." He gestured to his men, who fanned out to block my escape. My heart hammered, but I kept my cool. "If you're so certain, why not go to Harrows yourself?" Kason snorted. "I'm not suicidal, but I am resourceful, and I'll pay well for coordinates, a weakness, anything that guarantees a better shot at that bounty." He paused, eyes narrowing. Or maybe you plan on going back to finish the job yourself? I have no intention of going back, I said slowly, my voice echoing in the enclosed space. Harrows isn't something you just stroll onto and walk away from unscathed. And the Namakuji, well, if you're smart, you'll let it be. Kason clenched his jaw. Not an option, he growled. I've got a backer with deep pockets. They want proof the beast is gone or a guarantee it will be soon. Either way, you have knowledge that could help. I could see the glint of desperation in his eyes. My silence was an answer he didn't like. His men cocked their weapons, tension coiling like a spring. One false move, and the corridor would light up with gunfire. A curious calm washed over me. I thought of the Namakuji, wounded and alone in that icy cavern. I thought of all the hunts that had led me here, each kill a stepping stone of blood. I'd chosen a different path now, and maybe it was time to prove it. I won't help you kill it, I said, voice steady. If you want to chase that bounty, do it on your own. My knowledge is off limits. That was the last thing Kason wanted to hear. He lunged forward, fury flashing across his face. His men raised their rifles, too slow. Years of combat training took over. I pivoted, firing a stun charge that caught the nearest merc in the chest, dropping him. Another swung a blade at me, but I sidestepped, smashing the butt of my rifle against his visor. The corridor erupted in chaos, muzzle flashes illuminating swirling dust as bullets ricocheted off metal walls. Kason, for all his bravado, was no slouch. He fired a well-aimed shot that grazed my shoulder armor, sending sparks flying. The impact staggered me, but I managed to return fire, forcing him into cover behind a shipping crate. My suit's AI howled warnings of structural damage to my left pauldron, but adrenaline overrode the pain in a matter of seconds. 2 of Kason's men were down. The remaining 2 peppered the corridor with suppressive fire, forcing me to duck behind a bulkhead. Sparks showered the floor as bullets ricocheted. Kason shouted orders, spurring them to press the advantage. I took a calculated risk, firing a timed explosive round at the crate shielding Kason. The detonation blasted splinters of metal and plascrete in all directions. Kason was flung backward, slamming into the corridor floor with a guttural scream. Before his men could react, I surged forward, disarming them with swift brutality. One got off a desperate shot that scorched the side of my helmet, leaving a molten streak across the visor. When the dust settled, Kason's men lay sprawled, either unconscious or incapacitated. Kason himself groaned in pain, armor cracked. I stood over him, the muzzle of my rifle an inch from his visor, and he stared up, wide-eyed, breath ragged. "You'll never be safe," he hissed. "They'll keep coming for you." I believed him. Lowering my rifle, I stepped away. "Then let them come," I said quietly. "But you won't be among them." I turned and walked off, not looking back. Behind me, Kason's ragged breathing faded into the station's metallic corridors. The easy path would have been to end him right there, to tie up loose ends. But that path was no longer mine. I had chosen a different code, guided by something more than the hunt, a new kind of journey leaving that station behind. I retreated to the Wraith's wing and took off, navigating the labyrinth of starships and asteroids that dotted the system. My shoulder throbbed from Kason's lucky shot, each movement reminding me how fragile life was out here. Yet, for the first time, I felt something close to freedom. Engaging the FTL engines, I let the swirl of faster-than-light travel surround me once more. My thoughts drifted to what lay ahead. Would I keep roaming star to star, forever looking over my shoulder? Possibly. But maybe, just maybe, there was something else out there. Some place where I could find redemption, a chance to put down roots, or to help others walk away from the brutal cycle of violence that define this galaxy's fringe worlds. The ship's AI chirped with a navigational query. I input random coordinates, pushing further into uncharted territory. The stars on the view screens stretched and shimmered, like white-hot lines scratching across the darkness. Somewhere in that vast cosmic sea, the Namakuji might still be alive, forging its own path of survival. And somewhere, the hunters would track me, seeking whatever knowledge they believed I held. That I gazed at the star lines, lost in their dance. The bounty boards would list me as a traitor to the guild, or as a liar who claimed to have seen the Namakuji. But it didn't matter. My purpose was my own now. The swirling cosmos offered no easy answers, only the promise of infinite possibility. shaped by the choices we make and the lines we dare to cross. And so, the galaxy's greatest bounty remained unclaimed. The deadliest creature in the cosmos lived on, wounded, perhaps, but free. As for me, I had become something else. A wanderer bearing the burden of a secret I no longer wished to trade. My hunts from now on would not be for credits or glory, but for a cause I had yet to define. Maybe I would become a protector of sorts, or a seeker of truths lost to the endless void. All I knew for certain was that my old life had ended in that icy cavern on Harrows, and a new journey had begun, one that would test my resolve as surely as any hunt ever had. Because sometimes, the greatest adventures aren't the ones we seek, but the ones that find us when we least expect them. And in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, where law is a whisper and danger is a roar, a single choice can echo across the stars.